Hello, I'm back with another Smash Up video, and in this case I am covering the sharks, and I'm going to use this to get to the tornadoes and then the sheep so that I can talk about the sheep in a situation where they make as much sense and context as possible. The sharks are one of the better destruction factions you can get their hands on, and they're a little bit 1v1 focused, and when they work properly, they're a complete package, including a destruction package, a bunch of extra plays, 4 Makos and 2 Blood in the Waters, and the card draw from Week of Sharks to fuel those extra plays. When you're able to make this destruction draw and extra play engine work, the Sharks are going to be a strong faction that generally consistently grinds down most opposing decks most of the time. However, they have 3 weaknesses that your opponent can try to target, and so I'm going to talk about each of these weaknesses. First, how to target them, and second, how the Sharks can fight back against these weaknesses by picking the right partner faction. So, without further ado, the first weakness the Sharks have, because they have, Hammerhead, Blood in the Water are both sort of grindy cards that give you steady advantages over time based on killing stuff, and Week of Sharks is also a card that does more the longer it stays in play. The Sharks have a little bit of a weakness to opponents trying to sit back without providing you a lot of destruction targets and then burst you. All-Stars decks are notorious for this. You'll also see this kind of style of play from robots and teddy bears, good Ignobles decks, rock stars. There's a lot of factions, especially a lot of more recent factions, that like to play this way. And one tactical tip I will give you against the Sharks when trying to use this strategy, which works mostly well in 1v1, but can be used between multiple players and multiplayer. You're going to find yourself making setup plays that expose minions to the Sharks to destroy before you reach your burst turn. I recommend trying to line up a sequence of minions that are all the same size and presenting the Sharks with that. Because statistically speaking, the Sharks are more likely to draw a variety of different minion sizes to target, whereas a faction like Pirates or Vampires or Ninjas will often draw a whole bunch of 3 kills or a whole bunch of 2 kills. The Sharks are going to get a variety, and that means if you hit them with a sequence of 3 power minions, for example, they're going to pretty quickly find themselves either using a card that is a little bit too big for its target, or finding themselves holding cards in their hand that can't kill the stuff you're playing. And this is going to make it a little easier for you to set up for a burst and get in range of a burst against the Sharks. Now, how should the Sharks fight against this idea? Well, if you think this is how your opponents are going to try to beat your Sharks, there are 2 obvious factions to pick: Dragons or Warriors. And both of these factions specialize in blunting burst. And Dragon Sharks or Warrior Sharks will be sufficient against the vast majority of burst decks. The very best burst decks, though, at least in a 1v1 game, they will tear right through Dragons and Warriors. Like the best All-Stars decks, or something like Ghost Robots or Teddy Robots, you are generally not going to stop this way, but those decks are fairly broken anyway. The second way you can target a Sharks deck weakness is by going after their card draw engine of Week of Sharks. Tricksters is particularly good at this, but any faction that has some sort of reliable action destruction can try to deny the Sharks their card draw. Tricksters are extra good at this because their 2-power minion, Gremlin, also forces the Sharks to do a random discard whenever the Sharks kill it. And it's also very nice to have action destruction against the Sharks because it could kill Blood in the Water, but it can also get rid of Dangerous Waters. And this Dangerous Waters card is one way the Sharks can get rid of a stream of big minions. Say if they're facing princesses or something. Using Dangerous Waters makes it so that they can turn a princess from power 5 into 3, and that makes it a lot easier to kill. So action destruction to make Week of Sharks less efficient can mean that you're playing against a Sharks deck that usually doesn't get its card draw running, rather than usually does get its card draw running. So as Sharks, if you find out that you are facing an opponent who wants to get rid of your week of Sharks, it's often good to try to shore this up by finding a partner faction that brings some card draw. Even Wizards, which I normally find a little bit boring, or Grannies, who are usually pretty weak, can do this role pretty well and just give you a faction that's going to have enough card draw. So sure, go ahead and kill Week of Sharks. I covered it with my partner faction. But now with all of this, these are both ways that you can target the faction in 1v1, but Sharks are pretty decent in 1v1. On my 1v1 list, I had a hard drive crash, so I don't have the stuff, I don't have everything reinstalled yet, but in 1v1 they're ranked 29th out of 55 with 1493 rating, but in 3-player I have them at 51st out of 55. With a 1359 rating, which is much, much worse. And this is primarily due to the Sharks' third weakness. And the third weakness is much easier to target in a multiplayer game. And that is that both Hammerhead, your main source of +1 counters that help grow your minion, and Blood in the Water, your main source of extra plays other than Mako, both say a minion, after a minion is destroyed here. Because of this, when you're facing the Sharks, if you see a Hammerhead or Blood in the Water, you can recognize that the Sharks are getting extra benefit out of killing any minion at the same base as that Hammerhead or Blood in the Water. This means if I am playing against the Sharks player on my right and 2 other players on my left, if I see a Hammerhead at base A, I don't want to have minions at base A. I want these other players on my left to have minions at base A, because then the Sharks' destruction is going to target everyone except me, and I'm going to end up ahead of everyone on development because my stuff isn't getting killed because I'm not offering the Sharks an extra benefit from it. And this means that even though the Sharks have a 4 that can move around freely, they can play a bit like a stick in the mud in multiplayer who can get isolated, because it's in my best interest to play away from Hammerhead or Blood in the Water, and same for the other 2 players in the game. Nobody wants to play with the Sharks. When the Sharks set up their setup cards in play, everyone wants to either run away or break the base before the Sharks' next turn. And they do have 1 card that can move a Hammerhead. But this is 1 card in the entire deck. You may not draw it, and once it's gone, it's gone. So because of this, in multiplayer, the Sharks are often very vulnerable to isolation unless they have a partner that provides them with movement. And there are 4 factions I recommend as Sharks partners in multiplayer to help deal with this issue. The first are the Shapeshifters, whose Transmogrify, really, and Back to the Future cards all destroy a minion, usually your own, and allow an extra play that doesn't necessarily have to be at the same base. And this provides virtual movement. This activates your Mako, this activates your Blood in the Water, and this activates your Hammerhead. So the Shapeshifters make sure that you always have something dying. The second opportunity to cover this come with the Princesses. Snow White can either move hostile minions to your base or move friendly minions to a base where they'll be more active, and since her ability is a talent, you still have a minion in an action play. Tale as Old as Time lets you move all your minions at once to set up a big play. And you have 2 copies of True Love's Kiss, which can move either friendly or hostile minions. And between these 3 cards, one of which uses minion plays and the other 3 of which use action plays, you have enough movement that opponents trying to isolate your Sharks usually find out that they're playing into some sort of princess trick. The third faction I recommend playing the Sharks with in multiplayer to cover this particular weakness is the Explorers, Although this one, I actually recommend Explorers less than the other three, and that's mainly because the Explorers have a very powerful but kind of inconsistent way of drawing cards in Forgotten Horrors. That is, some games they're going to draw all the cards and dominate, but in multiplayer, most games, they're either not going to draw Forgotten Horrors or it will get blown up right away. And they pair this with extra plays of their own in Lost City and Crypt Looter. But the problem is, Crypt Looter is a 3 you can always play as an extra card, and this really does not play well with Blood in the Water. The issue is, Blood in the Water is converting a 2 or 3 or less, if you've got something that's marked as a 1 or 0, into an extra play when you kill something. But the Sharks 2 is already an extra play. So the Sharks are only able to extra play Hammerhead and their partner factions 2s and 3s. And so when the partner factions 3 doesn't play well with Blood in the Water turns into a pretty weak card. And that's the main reason why I don't really recommend Explorer Sharks as much as the others. But of course, the real winner when it comes to Blood in the Water is the Tornadoes. Look at this Twister card. It's a 3, it's the biggest card that Blood in the Water can play, and it moves a minion of power 3 or less from here to another base or for another base to here. That means that you can generate extra burst off of a Blood in the Water proc, or you can activate Blood in the Water and make your 3-power minion move itself to another base. And so you end up with a lot of flexibility whenever Blood in the Water goes off. Gone with the Wind also works pretty well whenever you get a big string of counters. And really, Blood in the Water is a big part of why the Tornadoes are incredibly good with the Sharks. So in short, for Sharks, in multiplayer, pick a movement faction. Tornadoes is even better than the others, but I may go over Sharknadoes in a more detail when I cover the Tornadoes next time, but I think the synergy is obvious there. Explorers is an okay way to cover it, but Shapeshifters and Princesses may actually be better than Explorers to cover it, just because Explorers does such a bad job of working with Blood in the Water. Princesses also does a bad job of working with Blood in the Water, but Princesses needs extra play less because when your normal minion play per turn is frequently a 5, you've already got a lot of power on that. So that's the Sharks pretty quick, and next time is going to be Tornadoes and maybe Sheep in the same video.